Right. Hi, everyone. My name is Joseph Henry, and thank you for joining us for the CUNY BA Student Showcase. It's my great pleasure to kind of be the MC for today's proceedings. So my name is Joseph. I'm one of the graduate fellows we have here at the program, and I've been working on the Student Showcase and all the other events alongside my colleagues. So I just want to briefly also welcome my colleagues, Julie Fuller, who's a graduate fellow in the program doing her PhD in English, Michelle Chinitz, who's also in the English program, Ivana Durovic in the linguistics program, and our fellows coordinator, Kyun Kim, in the theater and performance. I myself am art history at the Graduate Center. Before we get started, I also want to acknowledge Julie Fuller, who's been the coordinator of the showcase. I'm doing a tremendous amount of work over the last couple of months to put this together and working with the students. So a Zoom acknowledgement, a round of applause for Julie, and also for the students who you'll hear from today. We're also lucky to be joined by members of the CUNY BA staff and team. And so the showcase is kind of it's our great kind of culminating event for the year. It's our academic event where you'll hear from kind of the research projects that students in our program have been doing. So it's a way for us to kind of address the wider CUNY BA community and our friends and colleagues. So we have a wide range of research interests for today, and I think it really speaks to the breadth and diversity of the knowledge we have at CUNY BA between our students, our fellows, our staff, and our faculty, mentors, and other folks. It's also a way for students to kind of build some professional development experience. We've been working with students on public speaking, on how to kind of frame research, in ways that I think they can carry on after they move on with their degree in the program. So I'll be shortly introducing our interim director, Teresa Kermie, but I just want to give a kind of sense of the afternoon's event and how things will play out. So we have 5 speakers this evening. Unfortunately, Sam Asensio was unable to join in person, so he'll be sharing a video as his contribution for the day's proceedings. So each speaker will be introduced by Teresa briefly, and they'll give around a 5-minute presentation, at which point we'll open the panel for questions and commentary. So please do use the chat feature you'll see below, as well as the Q&A feature to ask any questions, and I'll be moderating them and giving them to the speakers. We'll do that for about 3 minutes after each presentation and moving on for the course of the day. And likewise, we have closed captioning. So if you click on live transcript at the bottom, you'll be able to see a kind of written transcript as things unfold. And so with that, I would now like to welcome Dr. Teresa Kermie, our interim director, to the Zoom. So Teresa.
Everyone, I'm Teresa Kermie. I'm the Interim Academic Director of the CUNY Baccalaureate for Unique and Interdisciplinary Studies. Welcome to our 3rd CUNY Baccalaureate Student Showcase. We're so glad that you could join us today. As Joseph mentioned, we have another great lineup of presenters this year, each of them discussing a project that's related to their unique areas of study. The projects reflect the diverse interests and work of CUNY BA students, their talents, their creativity, and their passion not only for learning, but for exploring in greater depth the topics that intrigue them and applying what they've learned. Before we introduce our fantastic presenters for today and get started with the presentations, I'd like to also take a moment to thank everyone who helped to coordinate this event. A very special thanks goes to the CUNY BA graduate fellows who organized the showcase and who also worked very closely with the student presenters to prepare for the day. And our thanks to the CUNY BA students who are giving us today a glimpse into their remarkable work. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Our first presenter today is Brandon Grayson Kim. Brandon is a rising senior in the CUNY BA program with dual areas of concentration in moral philosophy and axiological futures research. Brandon entered the program during his sophomore year and has since become an active member of the CUNY BA community, most recently serving on the executive board of the Student Leadership Council, as well as on the CUNY BA University Committee as a student representative. He's an aspiring academic and professional philosopher with a particular interest in the theory of value. Currently, Brandon works at the intersection of ethics and futures thinking about the future of humanity, or whatever is left of it. Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you, Teresa. So as mentioned, my name is Brandon Grayson Kim. My areas of concentration are in moral philosophy and axiological futures research. And both this project as well as my degree program is supervised by Professor Christine Vetrano of Brooklyn College. She is a professor in the philosophy department there. And today I'll be presenting a short excerpt from my thesis, undergraduate thesis, which I'll actually be defending next week. And it is titled On Existential Hope, Societal Flourishing at the End of Time. So in the early 1990s, a poem titled Commuter's Lament or A Close Shave was installed inside the pedestrian tunnel connecting the Times Square subway station and the Port Authority bus terminal. The poem reads, overslept, so tired, if late, get fired. Why bother? Why the pain? Just go home and do it again. It carries with it a sort of New York wit, but I'm sure the message will resonate with many others, New Yorkers and outsiders alike. The poem, which was sponsored by the City University of New York and commissioned as part of the MTA's then public arts program, was originally intended to be displayed for just a year. But as it often happens in New York City, the installation somehow managed to outlive its contractual expiration date. And so the installation remains today, over 30 years later, in its exact location, now forever part of New York City's iconic architecture. The artist, Norman B. Cope, a lifelong New Yorker himself, sought to address the working public through his artwork. Evidently, he seems to have been quite successful. After all, the installation's targeted placement ensures that thousands of daily commuters are reminded day in and day out of the monotonous and perhaps meaningless quality of their lives, although that may be a bit presumptuous. Nevertheless, it seems almost too good to be true that a work of art intended to mock New Yorkers has managed to survive this long. My inclination is that even just a moment of reflection often leads to a strikingly depressing realization, that being life is never as good as we've convinced ourselves it is. And, well, there's no point in fighting the truth, or at least tearing it down in this case. Life sucks. I won't refute that neither here nor anywhere else in this presentation. In fact, I'll take it as a given in relation to the argument which I aim to make. After all, what makes a life worth living? Or put otherwise, what makes a good life? Think about it for a moment. Even the most bright-eyed dreamers, when seriously put to the test, I suspect will answer with some sort of optimistic, but nevertheless reasonably attainable value, virtue, or goal. Perhaps it's to be happy or to be successful, to be compassionate, kind, and truthful, or even something so simple as to find love and be loved. Although the simplicity of this last point may be contested, but I digress. Regardless, what often follows is a disclaimer or deflection of some sort, or in other cases, a downplaying of the virtue itself. For example, if attaining success is what gives meaning to my life, I might say, I'll be successful when I publish my first paper. Or consider this example of conditional happiness. I'll be happy just as long as my partner is. What's familiar about both these examples is that they are within the limits of reason, albeit not certain to happen, but there exists some degree of possibility. Instead, if I were to answer, I'll be successful when I become the first person to land on Mars, you would think I'm talking nonsense. I'm not doubting that it's certainly implausible, but to seriously consider it a real possibility is absurd, to say the least. I say this not to discourage those that aspire to achieve more than what was thought possible, rather to highlight the subliminal notion that life is truly nothing short of a harrowing ordeal. At best, one can hope to live a life that is, in moderation, peaceful, effortless, and meaningful. But unfortunately for most, as I've established thus far, this is rarely, if ever, the case. Although by all objective accounts, Norman B. Cope, the artist, lived quite the successful life, he too realized the decadence that far too often characterizes life itself. And ultimately, it was precisely this moral decline, per se, that inspired Cope to realize his considerably all too depressing work, reminding us all with each passing by of the misery that awaits us at the end of the tunnel. Is to live then merely to hope to die? Well, after Cope's death, during an interview with his wife, Martha Stern Cope responded to the reporter rather bluntly with, "Why be optimistic in these times? Be realistic, life sucks, you get through it the best you can." Thus bringing to light once again the point made above, and in doing so, reiterating her late husband's sentiment. However unpopular this claim might be, I'm inclined to admit that she's right. For starters, what is there to be optimistic about? The world and society we live in is no longer as hospitable as it once was, and that is despite the incredible technological achievements we have come by, which that too presents a problem in and of itself. Consider for just a moment the growing potential for societal collapse, the threat of nuclear war, and of course the ever-growing danger of climate change among the now millions of other extinction-level risks. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now closer than ever to the end. That is, as recently confirmed by the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, it is approximately 100 seconds to midnight. And I'm okay with it. Contrary to what intuition may lead us to believe is the right way of thinking about our species' inevitable end. Much of the recent philosophical literature on this topic has centered on axiological concerns related to future persons and our duties to them, and rightfully so. The future of humanity, I must concur, is intrinsically valuable. So in addition to expanding upon the existing literature, in my paper, I shall introduce a novel concept of existential hope as virtue, since ultimately the intention of this paper is to respond to the question of how we, as one humanity, might reconcile the view that life does indeed suck with that of our desired futures. Beyond that, I wish to examine our present-day attitudes and practices toward the life journey before considering alternative responses such as optimism, pessimism, and of course, hope that may prove to be more beneficial in light of the troubling times we find ourselves in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you for starting us off. We now have the Q&A, so if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or chat. We can take a minute to wait. But I can go ahead. I have a question, Brandon, just to get the conversation started. Is I guess based on, you're faced with these kind of dour predicament we face at the end of the world. So I have a kind of maybe a philosophical question was for you, what's the difference between hope and optimism? You brought in these two concepts, and I'm curious how you think about them differently from each other.
Sure. So the role of optimism we generally consider to be an attitude. The way that I tend to look at it, optimism being an attitude is more of a passive component of living, whereas hope is more of an active component. In order to be hopeful, there needs to be some possibility that something will manifest. Of course, there are instances where we might have hope that is outside the bounds of reason. But in those cases, we can really suggest that that is a mix of optimism and hope. And so hope is really kind of the active component of living a meaningful life.
We have a question from Scott Davis. Is how would you put faith, that concept, within the other concepts you're bringing in together in your talk?
Sure. So ultimately, I think my paper dealing with hope and optimism and pessimism deals specifically with attitudes as opposed to beliefs. Within hope, there is the belief desire model, which is one account of hope. And the belief desire model essentially states that one ought to have a belief as well as a desire for hope to manifest. And I think though that view is often adopted by a number of philosophers in the field, I personally do not subscribe to it. And I think that faith would kind of underlie that account of hope.
I have a question from Corey in the Q&A, and he's writing that, do you feel that in the absence of a reasonable optimism, pessimism, or hope about the future, is the attitude of amor fati, or the love of one's fate, does this offer a possible, even beneficial alternative as a response to a harsh reality?
Sure. So I do think that hope is superior to optimism or pessimism. As I mentioned, optimism and pessimism being attitudes, they are more passive elements of living a meaningful life. And so ultimately, the intention in writing this paper is to suggest that we ought to hope as opposed to just be optimistic or just be pessimistic. And it's not good enough to just maintain those attitudes, because if we adopt a fatalistic attitude and kind of give up on life, which is a very plausible reality considering the state of the world. If everybody decided they just wanted to throw the towel in, that would not be so great. So I think ultimately that hope needs to be before optimism and pessimism and the other attitudes that exist.
We have one last question from Joshua Rojas. And do you believe that your work is a critique of the status quo? So what is the kind of maybe political critique you see in your project, intervening in kind of the political order that we have now?
Sure. So I don't necessarily think my work is a critique as much as it is an extension of what the current literature states. Politically, my argument may not be as popular. However, within the philosophical community and within the academic community, I do think that there is some value in shifting to a more active mindset as opposed to a passive mindset. And I will not speak on the politics of that. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you so much, Brandon, for your presentation today, and good luck with your defense next week. I'm sure based on what we've heard that you are going to be just fine, if I say so myself. So now I'll bring back Teresa to introduce our next speaker.
All right, hello again, everyone, and thank you, Brandon. Our next presenter is Kylie Lance. Kylie is a student at Hunter College. She became a part of the CUNY Baccalaureate program during her freshman year in 2018. Her area of concentration is psychology, language, and social interaction. Over the past 4 years, she's been working closely with her mentor, Dr. Maureen Matarese, who has helped her develop her interests within the field of linguistics, specifically on the topic of language as a social practice. This presentation is a part of a larger research project with her mentor, which is a linguistic ethnography on how the responsibility of preventing COVID-19 is being placed on New York citizens through the language and structure of COVID-19 signs. She's excited to announce that this collective research will be published as a chapter in the Pragmatics and Beyond new series book series in 2023. Welcome, Kylie.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for everyone who came to support the showcase. My name is Kylie Lance, and my project is called The Elements of Delegation Reflected in COVID-19 Science. So following the initial outbreak of COVID-19 in March 2020, the linguistic landscape of New York City had quickly changed, as many businesses posted signs in their windows that required masks and social distancing for entry. This movement prompted my mentor, Dr. Maureen Matarese, to reach out and initiate a linguistic ethnography, which would expand on her previous research on neoliberal ideologies of institutions and the responsibilities that are communicated by these institutions through language. So in September of 2020, our 5-person research team collected over 500 photos of COVID-19 signs across 4 boroughs of NYC to ask the question, how is the responsibility of preventing COVID-19 being placed onto New York citizens through the language and structure of COVID-19 signs? So for this showcase, I'll present my own findings from this collective research project. Next slide, please. As the team collected more photos of COVID-19 signs, there were a few things that I began to notice about signs that were made by New York State. First, many of them were encouraging social distancing, while also campaigning for the support of local businesses. Secondly, there seemed to be a pattern in their language and visual structure. So with further research, I found that New York State was delegating these responsibilities to citizens by resembling a management model called the Elements of Delegation. So the first step in the Elements of Delegation is the assignment of responsibility. This is where a manager will initially appoint a task for an employee to complete. At the same time, there's a granting of authority in which the manager grants the necessary authority to the employee to complete the task, which allows for the employee to delegate this responsibility on to others. Finally, there's a creation of accountability in which the employee demonstrates their accountability to the manager by completing the task. So in this model, rather than the authority only flowing downwards from the manager, the demonstration of accountability is also flowing upwards from the employee. Next slide, please. So the way that these New York State signs resemble this management theory is first shown by the banners at the top, which are an assignment of responsibility that usually delegate the task of preventing COVID-19. And as you can see, it simultaneously encourages the support of dining at New York City restaurants. The steps below provide the knowledge of how to complete this assigned responsibility, therefore granting sign readers with the authority to administer these tasks to others. The websites and the phone numbers at the bottom of the sign are resources that can be used for the sign reader, thus demonstrating accountability. Next slide, please. I also looked at the language patterns throughout the entire collection of signs, not just with New York State signs, but also locally made signs. And I noticed that there were some interesting syntax patterns. So as you can see on the left, telegraphic speech is often seen in prohibitive signs that communicate more of an immediate action to be performed before entering the store, such as telling sign readers, no mask, no service. As you can see on the right, there are more often complete sentences in informational signs that are expressing more of a general practice for sign readers to upkeep. So an example of this would be making sure you wash your hands consistently, or how to wear your mask when dining in general. Next slide, please. So for my discussion, I applied these findings together through the framework of critical discourse analysis, which analyzes how social and political power is conveyed through language. So on the left, there are two diagrams that represent the original design of the elements of delegation, and then the two triangles present the two syntax patterns that these signs convey. So combining these two ideas with the diagram on the right, if New York State is the top manager, then the local businesses are acting like a middle manager, and the community are the employees. An assignment of responsibility flows downwards from the state of New York to the local stores through establishing a COVID-19 protocol. The authority is simultaneously granted to these local stores, which allow them to maintain this protocol within their community. This responsibility and authority is then redistributed to the community through New York State signs and through the information that is provided on these signs. So through this, the responsibility and authority is being granted to each community member so that they may redistribute these responsibilities to each other. Going back upwards, the community members demonstrate accountability to the local stores through their immediate actions, such as wearing a mask, maintaining 6 feet, or participating as a consumer at these stores. The local stores demonstrate their accountability to New York State by maintaining that community members continue the practice of these COVID-19 protocols. Through the community and local stores completing these responsibilities and demonstrating their accountability, COVID-19 protocol becomes a general practice. So these findings imply that New York State is attempting to manage community members through COVID-19 signs. This is in line with neoliberal ideologies that have been found in institutional language. Also, by New York State signs promoting both socializing and social distancing, the responsibility for preventing COVID-19 is being paired with maintaining economic stability for the state of New York. Next slide. So these findings are only a small portion of what our entire research team has found, looking at all the data, and we're very excited to have this work published and available in 2023. With all that we've found, we'll also be looking into writing a book this fall. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, Kylie. So we have a question already for you to think about. One of the questions is from Joshua Rojas, where he's asking, how has the mandating of the vaccine been an example of this delegating model?
That's a really good question. So when we did this research in 2020, the vaccine hadn't come out yet. So a lot of our research actually doesn't cover that, but that's a really great question. And I'm sure that we'll dive into that when we start planning the book that we might write in the fall. So that's a really great question.
Another question. So what made you choose, this is from Karen Greenberg, what made you choose the elements of delegation authority model? How did you come to this idea?
Oh, thank you, Karen Greenberg. When we started the project, the idea was looking at responsibility. And this is an idea that my mentor has been working on in institutional language. So thinking about how responsibility was being shifted, I remember just doing research on where these ideas have kind of manifested outside of COVID-19. And just through looking online, I found that there was a business model called the elements of delegation. And after looking at New York State signs and looking at the structure, I just kind of found there was a pattern between the steps that were to be taken for COVID-19 safety and the steps that are to be taken in management to complete a task. So kind of just connected the two. It's very theoretical, but yeah, that's how that happened.
Question from Shona Trinch, who agrees with everything you said, but she's wondering if you can say a bit more about the discourse that you're uncovering, and what is neoliberal discourse for you in this project, or maybe you can explain what it would mean to the audience, perhaps.
That's a great question. So neoliberalism is an economic doctrine. Typically, it promotes a policy of minimal governmental interference in the economic affairs of individuals. So this policy could be analyzed via language, institutions, language within institutions. So we're seeing that there's a laissez-faire attitude of preventing COVID-19 by the responsibility of it being placed onto individuals as a personal responsibility to complete. So rather than it being the responsibility of public institutions like public health, as linguists, we're looking at the language of these signs to see how this is being done through institutional language. So they're treating the prevention of COVID-19 kind of as a business, which is not really the same thing. So why is this happening? And why are these public health institutions using business principles to control and create accountability among the populace? So that's kind of how we're connecting neoliberalism, which is usually an economic doctrine, with language, institutional language. Hope that answered your question.
I think so. It certainly answered the question, answered it for me, put it that way. We have a question from our dean, actually, from Brian Peterson, and he's asking that if we're moving into what you might call a pre-post-pandemic phase, how is public response to this delegation authority model going to change? Is there going to be more compliance, less compliance, more or less indifference? What do things look like moving forward for you?
That's a really great question. I mean, obviously, the mask mandate, people are kind of split into two. We see people wearing masks, we see people not wearing masks. Yeah, I think that this research, when it was initially done, we were much more, it was lockdown. It was a much more intense period. And I think that we were seeing a lot more accountability kind of happening. There were news stories about people yelling at others about not wearing their masks, and that kind of thing was kind of happening. And I don't know, it'd be really interesting to see, how people are holding each other responsible, like community members. That's kind of more what I'd be interested in looking at. But yeah, so it's not a great thing that COVID is still happening, but it does allow for us to kind of have a part 2 or a part 3 on this research, which we're definitely looking to do in the fall. So that's another great question.
Great. Thank you so much, Kylie. And we really look forward to the book project and the research that will change as we move forward with the pandemic that is also moving forward. So I'll bring back Teresa to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kylie. All right, our next presenter is Ella Morton. Ella is a CUNY BA student and Thomas W. Smith Fellow at Brooklyn College. Her area of concentration is material culture, with a particular focus on the progressive era. Next semester, she begins working towards a master's in liberal studies at the Graduate Center, concentrating in American studies through the CUNY BA MALS pipeline program. Ella found her presentation topic last summer while volunteering in the archives at Ellis Island. Her talk is about the women who worked as matrons on the island, which was a job like no other. In June, she'll present her research at the Space Between Society conference at Case Western University in Cleveland. Welcome, Ella.
Good afternoon, everybody. So as Teresa mentioned, I was volunteering in the Ellis Island archives last summer, where I came across this diary written in 1903 by a matron named Maud Mosher. And in it, she talked about the immigrants that she worked with on Ellis Island with both admiration and, frankly, disgust. And reading this diary made me wonder about the perspectives of other matrons and what kinds of women might sign up for such a role. I was already working on another independent study about Ellis Island and the museum with Professor Karen Shelby from the Fine Arts Department at Baruch. But, you know, these matrons, they had a hold on me. And so in my own time and with my mother's ancestry.com account, I started looking at census records to find out who they were. And with further research, I ended up discovering that these were women who were employed for their traditionally feminine attributes, which were then weaponized to exclude undesirable people on behalf of the federal government. So thanks to Professor Shelby's encouragement, I will be presenting my research at the Space Between Society conference next month in Cleveland, but I'll be giving you a preview of that presentation right now. So to start with the basics, what is a matron? Well, imagine a job listing where the daily duties included executing arrest warrants, giving instructions for bathing in Yiddish, and serving milk and crackers to detained children. That would be a job ad for a matron at Ellis Island in the early 20th century. At that time, a matron was a woman employed at a residential facility like a prison or a hospital or a boarding school who took care of women and children's well-being. And these are two Ellis Island matrons in the white shirts in 1913. So in the early 1900s, about 2% of immigrants who arrived at Ellis Island were denied entry for being physically, mentally, or morally unfit. And women in particular could be barred for adultery, fornication, prostitution, or illegitimate pregnancy. And there were hundreds of women and children detained on the island for days, weeks, even months, after which they were either deported or granted entry on appeal. And matrons had to make sure that all these people ate, they bathed, they stayed healthy, they communicated with family members who may have already been granted admission, and they went to legal proceedings so that they might secure their own entry into the United States. Matrons also enforced deportations. Some of the detained women had been transferred to prisons or hospitals or psychiatric institutions. And legally, any immigrant could be deported if they became insane, in the wording of the time, within 5 years of arriving. And immigrant women could be deported if they were caught doing sex work within 3 years of arrival. It was a matron's job to go fetch these women, to bring them back to Ellis Island, and to make sure that they got on a steamship back home. And sometimes this went awry. Maud Moshe, the matron who wrote the diary that I mentioned earlier, had this experience in 1907. She was bringing a 47-year-old Jewish immigrant woman from a psychiatric hospital on Long Island to Ellis Island when the woman attacked her. And the media coverage, as you can see, was hyperbolic. It painted this woman as some kind of wild animal. This was an era in which even progressive reformers were concerned about how immigrants might pollute the pristine gene pool of the United States. Eugenics was on the rise. People thought of appearance and behavior as hereditary traits. In 1918, a doctor at Ellis Island testified to Congress that if you land an insane person, and especially a feeble-minded female, you would be starting a line of progeny that will be a distinct disadvantage to the country. And this was part of why matrons had to chase up women, even years after they had settled into their American lives, and put them on a ship back home. In my research, I found evidence of at least one case where a matron went even further. In 1924, a xenophobic immigration law shut out a ton of would-be immigrants. And that year, a matron named Regina Tedesco accompanied a deported person all the way back to the island of Montserrat in the Caribbean. Regina's passport application that she filed to do this does not list the age or the gender of the deported person, only that they were, quote, an insane colored alien. You can see that wording at the top right of this image, and that's a picture of Regina, the matron, at the bottom left. So Regina was an immigrant herself, she had arrived in New York from Hungary in 1889 at the age of 12. And she and her husband, Andrew, both worked at Ellis Island. She as a matron, he as an inspector in charge of the Immigrant Services White Slave Division. So it was his job to make sure that white women were protected from harm. And it was her job to make sure that those deemed harmful were sent back to where they belonged. And that to me sums up the paradoxical role of the matron. They nurtured and they rejected. They soothed and they punished. And they were the nation's moral guardians at a time when morality meant shunning the most vulnerable. That is my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I would love to answer any questions.
Thanks, Ella, for that extraordinary material you're bringing to the panel today. I guess, given the kind of range of materials, and you spent a bit talking about where this project or how it came into, how it was germinating, what areas of your professional training did you bring to this? Like, what were the kind of skills you had, or what was the kind of work of the archival research that you were doing?
Endless patience for archives, both online and in reality. Different variations on names when searching census records, for sure. Yeah, definitely archival research was a huge part of it. And also just having the kind of determination and patience to look for various documents in various locations. I was looking into federal government registers, which had lists of employees to find the names of matrons. And then I would go to census records to try to find them and see if they were listed during a particular year of the census or 10 years later, or whether they had moved. So that definitely required a lot of commitment, I would say. But it was really rewarding to see all these pieces come together and be able to create a picture of one of these women and what her life was like.
Yeah, I kind of open-ended one and a bit academic, but I guess I am curious the kind of language of racialization that you were seeing in these materials, like these kind of terms like dark, et cetera. I mean, can you talk about a little bit how you were thinking about that? And, the parallels, I think, between today's kind of rhetoric of immigration, if you want to put it that way, the language there. I mean, how have you seen this kind of play out in a broader historical frame?
Yeah, I mean, the terminology has been fascinating. One big thing is that the notion of whiteness changed over the decades when Ellis Island was in operation. And so people who may not have been considered white a few generations earlier, such as Italians, became white later on as they Americanized and settled in. But the immigration department was very influenced by eugenics and very frightened about this notion of America's white women being outnumbered by immigrants who were coming in, and that would dilute the white race essentially. So it was certainly part of things like congressional testimony. In the early 1900s, there was a book, I think it was called The Dictionary of Races of People, and it gave an ethnicity by ethnicity guide to the common features of particular nationalities and what to look out for, and their temperaments. It was sort of like reading about livestock. So it's definitely confronting to look at the language of the time, and especially the eugenics influenced perspectives on this whole thing.
Kind of right on that point, a question from, actually two questions I can fold together, one from Dean Peterson and one from Joshua Rojas again. I mean, are you seeing any similarities between the kind of Mexican-American border now, if you're keeping an eye on the kind of headlines and the discourse there? Are you seeing that as a kind of equal site, or a site for our kind of contemporary moment maybe?
Yes, I mean, this crosses over into my research on my other independent project, which is about the Ellis Island Immigration Museum and the version of immigration that it presents. Because in the US, we tend to romanticize the Ellis Island immigrant and think that, because they came from Europe in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and they helped build the nation, that this is a kind of model for what the American dream can be. But at the same time, there is all this mistreatment of immigrants coming from Mexico or other parts in Central and South America. So there's definitely a psychological disconnection between historic immigration and how that is viewed and how it's lauded, and current views of immigration. It's strange that people don't seem to make that connection. But yeah, I mean, it certainly ties into notions of whiteness and how we see all European immigrants as white now, whereas previously they were not.
Right. Thank you for kind of finding where this research is going and seeing the contemporary resonances. Ella, thank you so much for your presentation, and good luck on the conference in Cleveland. So I'll bring back Teresa for our next speaker as we move forward. And remember, a reminder for folks to also make sure you use the Q&A feature too. I'm happy to look at the questions there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ella. Our next presenter is Lourdes B. Uruchima. Lourdes is a CUNY BA student at New York City College of Technology. She's achieved success through the National Society of Leadership and Success, and her area of concentration is web design and visual media. The professor she worked with to complete her project is Joe Unander. Her presentation is about what makes Sunnyside beautiful to explore and why everyone should visit Sunnyside.
Hi everyone, this is Lourdes and I'm happy to be here. My presentation is called mysunnysider.com. So mysunnysider.com is a website that helps people explore the beautiful location of Sunnyside in Queens, New York. Some of the goals that I would like to present is to attract interest in Sunnyside culture and history, showcase Sunnyside's best restaurants, shops, bars, and venues, help tourists, locals, and visitors find hidden gems in Sunnyside, also increase tourism to Sunnyside and simply show why it's a place that should be visited more often. Next slide, please. So this is mysunnysider.com sitemap. It starts off as the homepage, and at the bottom you have maps, hidden gems, and you have history, best ofs, and contact us. Next slide, please. This is a wireframe I created of the homepage top. As you can see on the top, you have the navigation bar, the search bar, and on the far left, you have the logo. Next slide, please. This is how the website would look like if it was live on the internet. This is created using Photoshop. Next slide, please. This is another wireframe of the homepage bottom, and as you could see, it's just plain simple symbols and just plain simple design. Next slide, please. This is how the website looks like when it's live, and you could see that it's more has more content. Next slide, please. This is my logo evolution. It starts off at the far left, how I created my first logo, and then at the far right, you'll see the final design. It's called Sunnysider, and in the 1870 represents when Sunnyside was first discovered. Next slide, please. This is my final web page, how it looks like. It was created using WordPress. At the top, you have the navigation bar, you have the home, Meet Sunnyside, hidden gems, history over years, best of, contact us, and search bar. And at the far left, you have the logo. At the beginning, you have something that says your guide to getting to know Sunnyside, your adventure just got started. That's simply to attract more visitors to the website. When you play the video, play video, please. You'll see that how my website looks live, the homepage. At the beginning, you have a quote to attract more visitors. If you keep scrolling down, you have the Explore tab. And when you go down, you'll see the Hidden Gems tab and the Best Offs tab. And when you keep scrolling down, you'll see also the Explore and Learn Sunnyside, where you could learn more about Sunnyside. When you keep scrolling down, you have the best of restaurants, shops, bars, and venues, where you would see the best of restaurants, shops, bars, and venues that Sunnyside has to offer. Next slide, please. This is my Meet Sunnyside page. Meet Sunnyside page was sort of created to make good as a Sunnyside guide. If you play the video, please, you have an interactive map where you could locate all the stores and restaurants that are in Sunnyside. And at the bottom, you have a gallery, a mini gallery of the best futures on Sunnyside. Next slide, please. This is moments in history. This is sort of like a Sunnyside history. It tells you a little bit of the Sunnyside history. Can you play the video, please? Some of the Sunnyside history is stained glass art, the English Garden City, the Sunnyside Hotel, and the Sunnyside Rail Yard. And at the bottom, you'll read more of it and about it. Next slide, please. This is finally the best of page. This has 4 categories: best restaurants, shops, bars, and venues. Play video, please. And if you click on the restaurants, you'll see the top restaurants that are offered in Sunnyside. And these are the top restaurants that are offered in Sunnyside, like the Moles, Sangrajo, and all those different restaurants. If you go to the search bar and type in something like Italian for Italian food, it takes you directly to the search results for Italian food. And this is how my website came to be, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you so much for coming and being a part of the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Lourdes. The question we have is, a question we're getting from the chat is, how did you become interested in Sunnyside? And how do you see your website what do you see it doing for the neighborhood?
I became interested in Sunnyside because I actually live in Woodside and I visit Sunnyside sometimes. So when I went to Sunnyside, I seen that it has a very diverse and rich culture. So I was interested in Sunnyside because of that reason. And it's also a place where nobody really knows of it. So I wanted to showcase that, and so people could come and visit it more.
I have a friend in Sunnyside who would say the exact same thing, I think. We have a question also from Dean Peterson again. Where would you kind of bring this website? Like, what would be a new space for it? How to keep developing it? Would you do an app, for example? How would you modulate or change the website? Let's say if you had endless kind of time and resources.
I think I would create an application to showcase more of the different restaurants, and it would be really cool to have an application after this and to showcase the restaurants, the venues, the bars. So it's like a little exploration for people to go to and explore.
Any last questions for Lourdes? Oh yes, here we go. Question from Corey Plate in the Q&A. So kind of the same. So you inspired just to make, so what inspired to bring you to this website was you were living in Woodside and looking at Sunnyside. So what about it in particular, I guess, was it kind of, what makes it, I'll put it this way, I'll modulate this question a little bit. What makes it different from other parts of Queens maybe, or other parts of the city?
What is different, I think, is the diverse culture. It's very diverse. Like you have people from Morocco, from Egypt, like in every corner is different cultures. And I think that's what makes it so special. And everyone connects and unites together. And that's what makes it very special.
Great. Thank you so much, Lourdes, for your time and for showing us your website. Looking forward to see how it keeps changing and growing, just like the neighborhood does. So thank you very much. And we'll bring back Teresa for our next speaker. Thank you, Lourdes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Lourdes. Great job with the website. Our next presenter, Andrea Maria Black, goes by her stage name Andrea, spelled A-N-D-R-E-Y-A-H, as you can see here on the slide. Her area of concentration is music and media performance through technology, and her home college is Brooklyn College. Ms. Black is a singer-songwriter, actress, and minister who has worked professionally in off-Broadway. She's also performed one-woman shows she produced in the Moja and Piccolo Spoleto Festival in South Carolina, and the White Dog Festival in Belarusia, where she was also an adjunctor. Ms. Black has sung with renowned jazz musicians at prestigious venues in New York City and in South Carolina. Her work has also taken her beyond the USA. She has worked, taught, and ministered in Russia and preached as a minister, missionary, and arts director in Africa, Canada, and South America. Andrea most recently won a fellowship in Austria to attend the Global Alliance Citizenship Fellowship Seminar in 2019, and is the grateful recipient of many awards for her outstanding academic and social outreach achievements. To name a few, the Bell Zeller Award and the Thomas W. Smith Award. Ms. Black took a challenge by taking a big break from her professional career to advance herself in music production and as a filmmaker. Andrea is currently in post-production, completing a documentary that she shot through her independent research film study course last semester and this semester to complete on her film, Our Fathers Are Heroes, which depicts her father's baseball career with the Negro Leagues through the era of segregation. Andrea gives homage to her father, a veteran and unsung hero, to preserve his legacy and history and to inspire generations to come. Welcome, Andrea.
Welcome. Our Fathers Are Heroes is a short documentary that I shot on my father, Gilbert Hernandez Black, retired Negro League ball player, historian, and veteran. I chose this subject to honor my father, preserve our family legacy, and to expose this unsung hero to American history for generations to come. In the fall of 2021, I enrolled in an independent research study in Film 1 with Professor Annette Danto. She had me create a film treatment. I developed a 3-page outline of the essentials of the film and submitted it to her. A film treatment attracts investors and collaborators. It also opens a window to the filmmaker's perspective for the production crew and others. I also had to create a pre-production schedule, which is essential for planning, executing every detail before the production begins. A pre-production document makes it easier for the cinematographers, producers, managers, and the crew before shooting. This spring of 2022, I enrolled in another independent research study film with Professor Robert Tutak. I'm under his mentorship, and I chose 2 talented students to work with me as an editor and a sound editor. This is my dad at the Milwaukee Hall of Fame, pointing at a baseball which he signed back in 2010. My dad loves baseball. At the age of 9, my father snuck into the Polo Grounds in New York City and climbed over the fence, observing the great New York Giants. That's how he learned to play the game. My father was a talented and skilled pitcher who played with the Milwaukee Braves and the Indianapolis Clowns in the mid-50s. The Clowns was one of the teams in the Negro Leagues organization. The Negro Leagues was organized by Andrew Rube Foster, a former skilled pitcher, to improve Black baseball because whites didn't allow Blacks to play on their team or in the major leagues. This is Rube Foster here with one of his teams, the Chicago Giants. In continuation, Gil Black played in the South in the same year Emmett Till was murdered. He played in the North as well, but most games were held in the South during the era of Jim Crow laws. In the film, he shares riveting history of segregation during his professional baseball career, as well as his fond memories with the Negro Leagues. Now you will see a segment that is at the end of my short film of Don't Mean a Thing, composed by Duke Ellington, performed by myself and my accompanist, Mariel E. Sprouse. Afterward, I'll share some takeaways. Don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do I, 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 do I? Don't mean a thing. All you gotta do is swing. Do I, 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 do I? Makes no difference if it's sweet or hot. Give that rhythm everything you got, 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 got. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do I, 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 do I? Thank you. This auditorium here is called the Klein Auditorium in Bridgeport, Connecticut. They allowed me to shoot this particular scene that you just saw there, and they were so impressed that they asked if they could sponsor the premiere screening, which will be in the winter. So please stay tuned into CUNY BA for further information. Now for some takeaways. Overcoming challenges during my independent research study film courses. One was to research how to create a treatment. Secondly, learning all the film equipment during the same month I had to shoot, because in 2020 and 2021, we could not go on campus to get any equipment because of COVID. And also obtaining the copyrights for my archives, public domain archives, so that I wouldn't have to pay $4,000 and thousands of dollars for footage. What I learned from my father. My father always said when I was a child, be a leader, not a follower. And he often taught from many quotes, such as, a wise man sits and listens while the fool wonders what to say next. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much for your presentation. We already have a couple questions in the works. Why did you decide to show yourself actually singing in the documentary film about your father? What was the kind of motivation for showing your own performance work in those? And then what about that song do you like, and it's kind of within its role in the film, for example?
Okay, well, just giving homage to my father and, you know, the gift that God has given me to sing, and wanted to sing Don't Mean a Thing, because that was a very popular song that related to baseball, rhythm, and, you know, all of that in that era.
And then there's a question also in the chat where your project title is in the plural, right? Our fathers are heroes. So do you think there's other kinds of stories like this where people, are looking back? What are the other kinds of stories that you think are within your father's story? And what are the kind of broader, maybe historical or social ideas you think it speaks to?
Right. Well, my conception was our fathers are heroes because many of us have heroes in our families that are unsung. My father being a veteran, there's a lot of the fathers who are heroes, veterans, and just many men that have paved the way today for, generations today and to come.
A question from Dean Peterson in the chats. What did you learn about your father in the course of making this film? Anything you didn't know before or maybe hadn't appreciated properly?
Well, my father always talked about his baseball career when I was very young. And I think what I learned is that my father was so honored that I paid attention to give him homage, bringing a film crew to his home and bringing the film crew to the stadium. And, it was just like, why me? And so I learned how important it was to him and how important he felt about it. That his daughter took the time and effort to do this.
Right, it's kind of like the perfect gift, right? It's a kind of gift to someone else in the way you're making work for yourself as well. I actually had a question. I loved when the clip that you showed where we cut to archival footage in the midst of you singing. I have a very kind of rudimentary question. How did you get that footage and why did you decide on it? And what are we looking at in that segment?
I'm so glad you asked that because there's so many components I can't even get to right now. But as I mentioned in my research, I contacted the Major League Baseball and they got back to me. They wanted to know what I was doing with this film, how I was going to distribute it. And I went to Professor Tutak, I told him, and we sat and we talked about it. I composed a letter about, distributing to local film festivals, major film festivals, academia establishments. And they honored me with this material. So that is just amazing.
This is really amazing. I have one question. I think what your film is bringing up is a question that I have too, which I think we probably do not know or aren't thinking enough about the history, the kind of racial history of baseball and what the Negro Leagues were. Can you just explain a little bit of how it functioned then and what this league was and within the kind of broader American sports world of the time?
Are you talking about, just explain that a little bit better.
Yeah, basically, what were the Negro Leagues? I think it's not a history that we know enough about, and maybe we don't need to do more reading into, and we'd love to say a bit more.
Well, there was a lot of Black baseball before the Negro Leagues was established, which a lot of sports aficionados don't know about, or just people in general who like sports or in Black history. Again, as I mentioned, the Negro Leagues was organized by Ruth Foster, who was a former skilled pitcher. Because of the Jim Crow laws and segregation, Blacks weren't able to play with whites. And my father tells some stories in this film to depict that. And also they weren't allowed on the major leagues, even though they were qualified to be on the major leagues. Does that help answer your question? Yeah, and we'll have to look at the whole film also to keep learning about. Yes, so come out and see it in the. One last question from Scott Davis in the chat. How did this tie into Jackie Robinson? Where was he for your father, and what's the role that he plays in your research? Well, Jackie Robinson was way ahead of my father, but he's the father of baseball in a way because he paved the way for Black baseball players, and he was a social activist in his own right through baseball. My father met him a few times and said he's a lovely person. And that's about all I can give you.
We'll have to go to the premiere to learn more. And so do keep
Yeah.
us posted of when the premiere is, and we'll pass all the information around to our networks and our students. Andrea, thank you so much for your contribution. And we look forward to seeing more. And I'll bring back Teresa for our last presentation of the afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Our last presenter for the day is Sam Asensio, whose pronouns are he, they, ze. Sam is a gender fluid junior in the CUNY BA program, pursuing queer education and social advocacy and innovation at Zerhome College of John Jay. She is a current McNair Scholar, CUNY Peer Leader, and hashtag Scholar. Her projects include the creation of Connections, a paid stipend queer peer mentorship program, and spearheading the creation of John Jay's new LGBTQ+ center. Sam's current research interest is in LGBTQ+ pedagogy, education, program development, and assessment. And Z is currently working on research entitled From the Ones Doing the Work, Exploring the LGBTQ+ Service Landscape in Urban Higher Education, under Dr. Emelinda McSpadden. Sam's work can be found on the CUNY Peer Leaders website, hashtags Digital Friday, Spotify, and in various other forms of media publication. Please enjoy Sam's video shared with us today.
Hello all, my name is Sam Asensio. I am in the CUNY BA for Queer Education Reform and Social Activism and Innovation. I'm a lower senior here at John Jay. So I am the founder and creator of Connections, which is a queer peer mentoring program. And this is my project called Connections. So Connections was kind of really built off of the framework of me as a queer trans Latinx person here at John Jay. And I really kind of got this how-to guide of how to be queer or even how to navigate academic systems, especially as a first generation Latinx student myself. So what Connections kind of really aimed to do was kind of build a framework for each college system to build this queer mentoring program for students. So we really kind of focused, you can see here, on these basic frameworks or systems that students existed in, but there's no real connection to these systems. A lot of students don't really find themselves visible or seen in these systems. So when we created this mentoring program, what we wanted to do was find a way to provide a service for these students, regardless of a women's center or LGBT center or any dedicated service provider. What this is really focused on is creating a service for queer students. So what the framework really kind of wanted to do was increase retention and belonging by allowing these students to develop their program the way that they wanted. Each college campus is going to have different populations of students and have different needs, but as those students develop this program, it's going to change with that student and campus as well. So it was really about kind of trying to create a framework that was both flexible and stable and could be brought across multiple CUNY campuses or multiple campuses and create kind of a chapter and network at the same time, while dedicating a dedicated LGBT service for these students, regardless, like I said, of any service provider that might be available on the space. So a lot of the framework is kind of built off of what we call the 4 buds, which is what you see here, which we annotated to CALI, which stands for community, advocacy, leadership, and identity. And so why we call them the 4 buds is because we see each mentee that comes into the program as a flower that's ready to bloom from both the stem and the bud. By addressing each of these core values, we're allowing each student to grow in the academic space, both as a queer person and as a non-queer person, while exploring their identity and what they're capable of doing. And this is inclusive to all of the projects that we assign to them as they go along, from the social things that they'll be doing or the workshops that their mentors will be developing. And inclusive to this, when we build these mentor teams, we're building them both with faculty and students in mind, so both mentees and mentors can gain something from being within this program. So as you can see here, here's a lot of the significance and implications that can happen when we have peer mentoring programs like this on a campus. So it addresses students, service providers, campuses, it addresses things CUNY-wide, and it addresses the future growth and contributes to the literature with LGBT studies. There's not actually a lot of literature on LGBT studies. So what these students do in developing their program is allow themselves to research these queer spaces academically and gain something not only for their resumes, but their postgraduate opportunities as well. When we create these chapters per each CUNY network, we're allowing each chapter to develop independently, but also in conjunction with one another, learning from each other's mistakes, developing with service providers, and kind of getting rid of those silos that already exist on college campuses, because a lot of LGBT service providers are not aware of each other. So when we allow ourselves to get rid of those silos, we allow students to connect more independently and create a program that's more holistic for them. So the problem is when we're kind of developing it per college campus, we have to address each student population as we address each student individually as well. And as I already said, a lot of college campuses are silos. And so there's not a lot of people who are aware of this kind of work. A lot of people don't even know Connections exist. Like you could Google it and you'd actually find the Delegation page that students made themselves for the program. So a lot of the issues that we find is, how do we get the work out? How do we educate people? But a lot of that would come from the students and faculty who are developing these programs and the networking and chapters that would exist. And furthermore, we have to manifest this kind of work so that it's handed down and people understand how important it is. So from the mentees and students that chase their post-year graduate goals to the faculty who are developing within this program, there's something that needs to be passed down as well. So the second chapter of Connections is actually being built right now at the Bronx Community College. And so the kind of difference that we're seeing with this is that as comparative to John Jay, the Bronx Community College is a 2-year institution that works with a different group of students. Those students have different postgraduate goals than a 4-year institution or a justice college like John Jay. So what we have to do here is create a format that works with these different sets of students and addresses their specific needs, because again, the services that are provided on these campuses are quite different. So we have to create these balance that allows them to take advantage of these BCC structures and programming and allow them to move past it into other programs as well. And so it's kind of creating these opportunities between the program implementation and unifying these individual college campuses as well. So connecting BCC and John Jay as well. So if you're interested in learning about Connections or bringing a Connections chapter to your campus, you can actually look up Connections Education or Connections John Jay on Google, and you can actually find our site and explore more about this work with me. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope that you can find and understand the importance of this work and bring your own queer peer mentoring program to your campus.
Thank you to Sam in absentia, as they say. So there is their contact information. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions about the project and the work that Sam is doing. And there's some information in the chat. That is our last speaker for the afternoon. So thank you so much, everyone, for listening and for your questions, and of course for the speakers and for all their work over the last couple of years and months in their research, but also in work preparing for the event. And also a thanks to my fellows for all their organizing labor. I'll pass over for some closing remarks right back to Teresa to introduce our last, some closing remarks rather.
Thank you so much, Joseph. I think every year after these presentations, we're left with so much food for thought and so many new things that we might even want to further explore ourselves. So I want to encourage anyone who's interested in connecting with the speakers, asking additional questions, or further discussing the topics that were covered today to reach out to the CUNY BA Graduate Fellows. They can help you get in touch with our presenters today. And for those CUNY BA students in the audience today, I hope that this event encourages and inspires you to present your own work at the showcase next year. This really is a great opportunity to showcase your skills and achievements. It's also a great way to just let others across CUNY know what interests you, what you're studying, and what particular projects and initiatives you're working on and are passionate about. We hope that you'll all consider joining us again next year, either as a presenter or as an attendee. Before I hand it over to Dean Brian Peterson for final remarks, I'd like to thank again everyone who helped to coordinate this event, everyone who participated, and a huge congratulations goes to all of our presenters today for a job very, very well done. With that, Dean Peterson, if you could please share your thoughts and closing remarks for the event.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Joseph, thank you. Great job moderating today. And to our students, Brandon and Sam and Andrea, Lourdes, Kylie, Ella, fantastic work. Really great presentations. Something I desperately needed as I am home quarantining with COVID. It was such a nice break from what has been a kind of routine in terms of having new things to think about today, and the spaces you took us all to through your research was just absolutely spectacular. Ella, the fantastic opportunity you've had to look at the archives at the Ellis Island archives. I've been to Ellis Island, hadn't even thought for a minute that of course there's archives there, but the stories that you must be able to access and see through a different lens. And Andrea, similarly, the story you're telling of your father and your family, and there's such a great presence in your storytelling that you almost feel like you get to know your father, even in the small snippet that you've told us about. And Lourdes, there's so many people doing similar work to what you've done with the Sunnyside neighborhood and your website. And I think some of the work that's going on at the Gotham Center, at the Graduate Center, if you're not familiar with it, shoot me an email and I'll connect you with the director there, because I think he would be very interested in what you are mapping out and putting together for a neighborhood, because he's very interested in looking at the historical aspects of the so many diverse neighborhoods that make up this great city that we live in. It's just great. And you know, Kylie, I wish I'd known. I'm the Graduate Center's COVID coordinator, and I've been in the world that you've been in, and I just, your approach to thinking about where we've been and my question to you about where we're going, something I'd love to chat with you about, because I've kind of lived what you have researched, and it would be really interesting to sit and talk with you further and just kind of share some observations. And Brandon, I'm going to end with you, because I will say you drug us to a dark place, 100 seconds to midnight. But I think there is a lot of hope, and there's a lot to be hopeful for. And your presentations all pointed to that. We're coming out of a very interesting time. But I think there's a lot to be optimistic about and a lot to move forward with. So I thank you all for the seriousness that you've taken towards your academic work and the work that you've done. I know this is only a snippet of the CUNY BA academic community and the work that our students are doing. I don't know how many faculty mentors we have with us today, but for those of you who are with us, I thank you for the commitment you have to our CUNY BA students, and the time and energy and effort you give to helping our students prepare their academic work and moving that forward. That is not unnoticed, and it is so greatly appreciated by myself and by Teresa and the CUNY BA team. And finally, just to everybody on the CUNY BA team who was involved in putting this excuse me, together. My thanks and appreciation for all that you do day in and day out for the CUNY BA program and our students. So with that, my thanks. I don't know if I'm pitching this back to Teresa or Joseph, but thank you.
Go with the baseball metaphor and receive the catch. But thank you, everyone. Just a final goodbye, and thank you to all our speakers and the CUNY BA staff, and thank you, Dean Peterson, for those remarks. So please do be in touch with the fellows, with the program, with the speakers, and have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you for coming and listening.